This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. I'm Adam Gardner, and we have a special show today. We were all saddened to learn of the death of Joe Nickell earlier this week at the age of 80. Joe Nickell was a prominent paranormal investigator who looked into all manner of historical, paranormal, and forensic mysteries, looking to get to the truth of things. I had the pleasure of meeting him back in the summer of 2009 at the amazing meeting in Las Vegas, where John and I interviewed him for the show. He was a kind man who was happy to talk to fans such as ourselves. He even taught me a fun magic trick using a wooden nickel, which I enjoy performing to this day. I'd like to share our interview with Joe Nickell, originally included in episode 53 of our show. That interview includes a better introduction and summary of his career than I could give here. His many exploits will be an inspiration to skeptics and critical thinkers for years to come.
And now for an interview with Joe Nickell, the original Ghostbuster.
Welcome, everybody. I'm here with Joe Nickell, the world-famous skeptical investigator, writer for Skeptical Inquirer.
I doubt that. I'm not sure you're telling them the truth. Oh, no. I could be too skeptical.
Oh, you probably never get sick of that joke now, do you?
No.
So,
no, a little flattery is helpful because most of my work is thankless, and in fact, people resent and resist a lot of what I do. So it's nice to come to a conference and get a couple of pats on the back. Yeah. It has to last you for all of next year.
On the way to the interview here, we came from your workshop that you gave, which was excellent. And various people were coming by asking for your signature for their book. One guy asked you to sign his shirt. I haven't seen that at a conference like this.
Well, as I say, I put it into perspective. It doesn't happen very often. Mostly at skeptical conferences, and of course, I've been around doing this now for 4 decades, and so I have a little track record, and it's very nice. There's nothing more rewarding than your peers' approval. I recently got an award from the IIG, Independent Investigative Group, out at the Center for Inquiry in Los Angeles, and they honored me. And the previous recipient was James Randi, so you can see what great company I was in. It's great because if you're an investigator like me, your fellow investigators' approval is worth everything. The fact that other people may not appreciate it or even like what you do matters less. So those death threats and those angry letters and all of that are made up for by the select few of your peers.
So as a bit of an introduction, you what kind of things have you investigated? Like, what's the top 5 things you would have investigated quickly?
Certainly miracle claims, everything from the Shroud of Turin, whether you think it's a miracle or not, or to weeping statues and all that, the whole part and parcel of miracle claims, hauntings, extraterrestrial visitations, not just flying saucer reports, but alien abduction claims and so forth. And such, I don't know if this is, top 5 in any kind of quantity way, but such bizarre things as spontaneous human combustion or crop circles.
So what is it about all these different subjects that brings you to it? Why are you investigating these, but you're not investigating, say, a murder or a robbery?
Actually, I have. Okay. I was a detective and private detective, and I have worked on all manner of other cases. I'm one of those guys who simply likes to investigate and solve mysteries, and I don't much care whether the mystery's a homicide, paranormal mystery, a good historical whodunit, whatever. But in my job as maybe the world's only full-time salaried paranormal investigator for the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry and Skeptical Inquirer magazine, I do look at those things that are generally called paranormal, or that might be thought of as pseudoscience. That is, that impact science in some ways. The paranormal suggests that there's something out on the very fringes of science that science may not know. Extraterrestrials, Bigfoot, hauntings, and so forth. Science often is not very interested in those topics, regarding them as trivial and as not being very likely to be productive. Yet we realize that people are very taken to these topics, that they promise wonderful emotional things. And because they do, there's a great attraction among the public. For example, if ghosts exist, we don't really die. If extraterrestrials are real, then we are not alone in the universe, and so forth. And so the public buys into these things out of all proportion to their evidence. And what we do is we say, let's investigate these. Let's not dismiss them. Let's not make fun of them and just hoot them down. Let's carefully investigate them, but with a view towards solving them. And the idea being that if the public is interested, then we're interested. And out on the I see my work as that I'm out on the very, very fringes of science, seeing whether there might be something science has missed or doesn't know that needs some more careful explaining, or in any case, science may simply need to be brought to bear with some forensic evidence or logic to explain to people what this phenomenon is.
So when you say you want to solve these mysteries, you kind of infer like as if, say, ghost hunters or ufologists are not solving them, but they would probably counter say they do solve it. They say it's an alien, and they say it's a ghost.
What they're doing is mostly mystery mongering. They are primarily saying, ooh, here's a haunted house, here's some strange noises, here's a blurry photograph. We don't know what's causing this. We don't know what those lights in the sky were. And then, therefore, they're saying, we do know. This is a haunted house, this is a flying saucer from another planet. The cancer that went into remission, the doctors can't explain it. Well, you see, there's a miracle. No, it's a logical fallacy called arguing from ignorance. If you don't know, then you can't say you do know. So we're trying to look at the cases that interest people, provide explanations for them, not merely dismiss them as debunkers might be accused of doing, or simply engaging in mystery mongering on the other side.
What kind of Canadian investigations have you done? Very well-known, any well-known ones?
Sure. My career started when I lived in Canada for 8.5 years because I was against the war in Vietnam. So I was a Canadian landed immigrant. I lived in Toronto. I worked as a magician. I was a private investigator with a world-famous company, and I dealt blackjack at Diamond Tooth Gertie's casino in the Yukon. And I began my career as a paranormal investigator there, primarily with, as early as 1969, I attended a seance in Toronto for CBC Radio to contact the spirit of Houdini. He was basically a no-show. It was a pretend. The medium pretended to communicate, but it was not convincing. And then a big case, my first big case, the McKenzie House haunting at 82 Bond Street in downtown Toronto. And I found, for example, that the footsteps on the stairs at McKenzie House, which were heard late at night and thought to be ghostly footfalls, were actually real footsteps of the cleanup crew in the building next door, which had a parallel staircase. And that case was a lesson to me because nobody had thought for 10 years, nobody had really gone next door. And it was the most obvious and first thing for me to do, and it paid dividends. And that case, McKenzie House, in 1972-73, that convinced me of the need to go on site and actually investigate mysteries with a view towards solving them. And, of course, I've investigated other Canadian mysteries, including a crop circle in southern Ontario, which I explained to the farmer's satisfaction. He shook my hand and thanked me because I showed him step by step how this had been constructed and was almost certainly a piece of work by a prankster. And it was
vandalized, yeah.
And convinced him. And he said, he was I was very convincing, and he was very grateful.
Yeah, so that was actually my next question was, when you solve an investigation, how do people respond to it? I'm sure, are some people happy, some people upset that you've ruined the mystery, or? All
of the above. Really, it depends. A lot of people, because these mysteries are full of emotion, they promise big things. They tap into our hopes and our fears. We're all apprehensive. We're all hopeful. The fortune teller may give us a view towards the future because we're all apprehensive about our health and our other aspects of our future. So there's an emotional component. A lot of people are thinking with their emotions. And when you come along and suggest that fortune tellers and psychics are phonies, or certainly fantasy prone, they can't do what they claim to do, people who are attracted emotionally will respond emotionally. They can get quite angry. And those of us who are skeptics are often thinking very cerebrally, very analytically. We're not realizing that the person we're talking with may be thinking with their heart, their feelings. If they get a message purporting to be from their dead father, this is emotional stuff. So what I try to do is, to the extent that I can, is be respectful of people who are sincere believers who've perceived something like a lake monster or whatever, and treat them with respect and try to explain it as best I can, noting that they have an emotional attachment. I am, of course, quite willing to find a fraud artist or a phony and kick him in the teeth. But for the average person, I think we try to be respectful. But people's reactions are all over the place. Some people will be convinced. Mostly, if they don't have a really powerful emotional investment, it's easier to convince a person. The person whose house it isn't the one that's being discussed, the neighbors, others may be quite willing to buy your explanation that it was just some sounds from next door. But the person to whom it has happened and who's emotionally invested in it may not be so easy to convince. And we often will not convince them, ever.
So maybe some people need some tough love in some cases?
I think
they
so.
They need to hear it even though they don't want to hear it?
Well, I do think that I question the paternalistic attitude that some people say, well, I remember a crusty old reporter telling me once in Grossman's Tavern in Toronto, telling me, hey, look, I'm as skeptical as you are, but I wouldn't do what you do. People need to believe in these things, and you're going around just, And I said, well, that's awfully damn paternalistic. Who are you to decide what they need or don't need? Shouldn't we just tell the truth as we see it, as kindly, yes, and respectfully as we can, that they may have an emotional commitment, but why should we decide, these weak little people need to believe in these little falsehoods? Maybe they don't. Maybe we do them a kindness if we suggest to them, look, the psychic doesn't know any more than you do. The psychic's just playing off of, fishing for information from you and seeing what do you really want to think, and then encouraging you to think that. And they're just hustling you. Maybe it would be better if you didn't rely on these fakers, if you could learn to make your own judgments, for example. But ultimately, it's not for me to decide what that person does or doesn't do. That's a paternalistic view. I just believe in telling the truth, and as best I can find it, without even always knowing that I.
Maybe some people can't handle the truth.
I think that's exactly right. I can almost hear Jack Nicholson saying that.
He's the paternalistic character, right? So in your workshop, and you've kind of hinted at here, there's a lot of investigations that turn out to be hoaxes. Sometimes it's people that are mistaken, but sometimes there's people intentionally trying to trick other people, right?
No question. I have, in fact, actually caught red-handed several ghosts.
So
and by ghosts there, in quotation marks, I mean pranksters.
Oh, wow. So this is like Scooby-Doo Scott.
Absolutely, absolutely. I have.
It's Old Man Withers from the.
I have caught them, surreptitiously flicking the light switch, that sort of thing.
Oh, so wow. You're the real Scooby-Doo, right?
Yeah. Well,
not the real Dana Scully, as people say.
As a manner of
speaking.
speaking.
You used to drive around like a kind of van bus thing too, didn't you?
Because Dana Scully never finds out hoaxes. She always finds the real paranormal stuff. You don't find real paranormal stuff.
No, I don't. I find the longer I do this, the more I do it. Now 40. This is my 40th anniversary, really, starting in 1969. The more I do it, the more I have become convinced that we live in a real, natural world, and that science is the best means of informing us about that world.
Yep.
And so I'm using In many cases, I'm using real scientific techniques, blood pattern analysis, other forensic techniques, argon laser light to find fake spirit picture traces, and so on. Certainly, in many cases, hard science isn't important, but certainly the scientific method,
testing theories,
and the use of logic, and the attempt to be impartial, to collect evidence and let evidence lead to an answer, not the other way around.
Don't pick an answer and try to cherry pick evidence for it.
Absolutely. The Shroud of Turin people, for example, believers in the Shroud of Turin you watch them, as I've watched them for many years, start with the idea that this is the shroud of our Lord. It's just they'll say things like, just one look at it and you could see that no one could have faked something like this. Well, it's just a totally emotional statement and in fact silly. But they start with the answer and then they work backward to the evidence. So when you point out that the shroud had no history, or that the earliest record was a bishop's report that the forger confessed, or that it's painted with red ochre and vermilion tempera paint, or that it carbon dates to the time of the forger's confession, and so forth. Well, because they already know the answer in advance, that they believe that it's genuine, they can find clever ways to the tempera paint, that was somebody splashed some on or something in copying it. The carbon dating, that was some kind of contamination, altered the carbon dating. In fact, the shroud's a forgery, and the evidence is overwhelming and corroborative. But you find that out by looking at the evidence first and seeing where it leads, and multiple pieces of corroborative evidence show that. It's a great example, but in all the other cases, in all the fields of the paranormal, you see people starting with an emotional answer and looking for evidence to support it. And in all fairness, I ask skeptics not to start with an answer that something is a hoax or a fraud or something. They don't need to be in a hurry to do that. They just need to look for the evidence, see where the evidence leads, and if it leads and shows that it's not true, fine, because then any needed debunking will be taken care of.
But would it be fair, say if there's a new UFO report that's on the front page of CNN.com, would it be fair for a skeptic to say this is likely not true, considering everything we know about past UFO cases?
We do.
So hold your horses just yet.
Yes, people? Yes. The least likely explanation of something like that would be that it was extraterrestrial craft, because it requires several assumptions. We would have to assume there's extraterrestrial life, then we have to assume that they're able to travel great distances and do it at incredible speeds and so on, when there's no evidence really that those are just assumptions, and there's several assumptions. So by the rule called Occam's razor, that the hypothesis with the fewest assumptions is more likely to be correct, we can look and say, we may not know exactly what that is, but there are a number of aerial phenomena that can be mistaken for UFOs, maybe a space debris or a meteor or whatever. And if you get some accurate data, you may be able to be fairly precise. In some cases, we can be pretty sure that a UFO is a meteor, for example. Its trajectory and maybe a greenish glow and some other clues will say that's probably a meteor.
Of all the things you've investigated, which one would you have wished to turn out to be a true paranormal event, true supernatural of what the people were claiming?
I guess my heart would be inclined to ghosts. I remember when my grandmother died and how much I wish that weren't the case. And I think I heard Carl Sagan once talk about how he wished that he could talk to his dead parents, and I now have dead parents is very poignant for me. He wished he could talk to them just even once a year to tell them how the grandkids are doing. And these are powerful emotions. There's nothing more emotional, I think, than that kind of longing for our loved ones not to be dead, and to believe, and there's powerful incentives to believe that they're still with us, And I mean, it's so poignant. I've seen, for example, a man who went faithfully to his wife's grave and talked to her, and it's very touching. A man's perfectly sane. It was just a touching thing to do. He missed his wife, and I think there's nothing for me more emotional than that subject. If I were voting, I'd probably vote for the spirit communication.
Yeah.
But and I certainly, low on my list would be spontaneous human combustion.
Or alien abductions.
But I do have a message for people about alien abductions. I told this to John Hockenberry on his show years ago. We were debating with some of the alien abductee gurus like Whitley Strieber, and finally Hockenberry said, well, our time's running out. Joe gets the last word. He said, do you have any advice for us? And in a moment of inspiration, I said, well, John, just keep being skeptical. They aren't abducting skeptics.
Yeah.
And that would be my best advice.
That's excellent advice. Yeah. It's similar to how, for some reason, astronomers are never spotting UFOs or alien spacecraft in the sky. You think the people who are looking at the sky the most would see.
You would think so. There have been one or two astronauts, I suppose, who've gotten a little gaga over things, but
they're not astronomers, though.
They're not astronomers.
They're pilots.
And that's right.
That's another thing. Pilots are quoted often of seeing.
Yes,
UFOs.
Pilots are actually not very good witnesses, eyewitnesses with aerial phenomena. You tend to think that they should be. But there's some studies that show that they're not really very good. And after all, the paranormal and superstition's no respecter of persons. There are many highly intelligent people who, for whatever their emotional needs are, buy into the Shroud of Turin or flying saucers or whatever. And you often say, okay, yes, that person is a real scientist. They ought to know better. But for some reason, they've gotten they're thinking with their emotions in this area, and they're misleading people. I could name any of a number of scientists who endorse some paranormal belief, but they are in a minority. Their peers, by and large, make fun of them, and they are not credible. But there certainly are very intelligent people who want to believe in the paranormal, and who can be persuaded, and for whom these issues are very emotional. And what they end up doing, once you've started with the answer, the more intelligent you are, the more you can come up with clever rationalizations that almost seem like common sense, but they're it's almost like the judo expert saying that the bigger they are, the harder they fall. The more intelligent person who gets off on the wrong foot or the wrong belief is able to fool himself and others more readily. The intellect is being used wrongly in that case to justify false belief.
If I could, through some kind of magic powers, which you will believe for the moment now, if I could have you investigate anything you wanted next week. So next week I could say, Joe, you can go investigate either a UFO sighting, haunting, a case of stigmata, you name it. What would you want to go investigate?
Well, I'm attracted to those things that are something that I have not investigated before. So when I heard, and I mentioned this in my workshop, the glowing statues at Campbell, Ohio, or another case in Conyers, Georgia, the statues with heartbeats, something like that. Something that I've not heard of before that's intriguing. But just to go investigate another haunted house when maybe it's the same old, okay, somebody woke up at night, thought they saw a ghost, they were having a waking dream, they heard some noises. We could spend a lot of time, maybe find out they really did hear some real noises under unusual conditions or something. Some of those cases, you can see that maybe at face value they don't look very interesting or very exciting. But anything that comes along and is something new or challenging, something that you think, yeah, that sounds pretty unusual and intriguing. I wonder what could cause something like that. That's the case that I want.
So you, over the past 40 years career, have you seen it all? Have you seen every single explanation for a ghost? Have you seen every explanation for a UFO?
No.
Are there still new ones coming up?
Oh, all the time. Every case is different, and there are whole new categories of things. I mean, out of nowhere came crop circles, just out of nowhere.
It was in the 90s.
In the 1970s, but then later they began to gain really great public attention. It was
revealed in the 90s, right?
Yes.
The original hoaxers came out.
Yes, and they're really new things that come along, and who knows what the future will bring? New wrinkles, new mysteries of all sorts, and of course, human hoaxing can create a very mysterious effect, and so all of these require investigation. And I'm convinced that they'll be with us for the foreseeable future. Some of the old canards, like the Bermuda Triangle, will make their comeback. UFOs will wax and wane, and we'll think we're done with them, and then there'll be a new generation and a new bunch of cases. And if I get tired and quit, there'll always be another generation of people for whom it's fresher and newer. But there are enough new things. I look back on old cases a lot, old spiritualist cases, and find where some medium we're pretty sure was a fraud doing a deception, but nobody could figure out how they did a particular trick. I love those. I like to go back in my time machine and try to gather contemporary reports and assess the conditions and see if I can figure out how they did it. And there are enough of those. I could just work on cold cases for the rest of my life. These old unsolved cases, and try to put some fresh light on them. And there are new cases all the time. And I think I'll always have plenty to do.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a TV show in that. The Real Cold Case Files.
Yes. Well, from time to time, I've had someone want to suggested doing a TV show in which I would be a central figure in a fictional show, or even investigate a series. It hasn't panned out yet, but even as we speak, there's interest in somebody doing something with my work. And of course, 3 years ago, the movie The Reaping, starring Hilary Swank, her role was based in part on my work.
Unfortunately, it turns out
it was a very bad movie.
There's that, and also it turns out within the movie, the paranormal was real, right?
Yes, it bore little resemblance to my work, and after about 10 minutes,
maybe the movie
supernatural took over. But I'm not responsible for all of that, and I have to say it was a pleasure to meet Hilary Swank, and Warner Brothers had me on the site, to have a look around and meet her and so forth. And I appear briefly on the DVD, and I suppose no great harm was done to me. And
there's nothing wrong with fiction having the paranormal in it, of course, right?
Exactly.
That's where it belongs.
But I remember the scriptwriter contacting me on different occasions, and I was pretty clear that this was Hollywood, and of course the skeptic wouldn't be skeptical for very long. There's this kind of cynicism and paternalism and so on that causes this jaded, cynical Hollywood crowd to believe that only if we sell fantasy can we make a buck. And people don't want to see skepticism; they want to see belief and angels and so forth. And I think they're wrong in that I think they misjudge the public, that there is an intelligent public who, if approached in the right way, there's a significant amount of the public who would watch a good mystery presented as a true mystery and then carefully investigated with a view towards solving it.
Just like Scooby-Doo, right?
Exactly. And you do see
old school
you do see some good programs on cable television,
like the Mythbusters.
But yes, but right up there are these just beyond the pale shows as well. Mm-hmm. And I just do the best I can and hope for the best.
I guess the problem is that Hollywood they don't see the different niche groups out there that they could be appealing to. Instead, they see the majority out there, and they only want to appeal to the majority.
Yes, and I think that's a mistake. But then, they don't get their advice from me and don't seem to want my advice.
Well, we have run out of time. Thank you very much, Joe, for joining us on the Reality
My pleasure.
Check. And do you have a website?
I do. www.joenickell, that's NICKELL.com. And you can see some of my varied personas and some of my blogs, and even hear me read some of my poems.
And you have some books available for purchase as well.
We do. We have a list of my mini books. I've forgotten how many I've written, but they take you. You can click on them and go somewhere and order them.
And of course, you have a regular column in Skeptical Inquirer.
I do, called Investigative Files, and each issue of Skeptical Inquirer and Skeptical Briefs, another publication that we have, I try to solve a mystery. And I've been doing that now for 4 decades, and I'm still going.
In my opinion, it's the best part of Skeptical Inquirer. It's what, the whole reason you buy Skeptical Inquirer is to see a mystery solved.
Well, thank you, and I hope the people who pay my salary hear you say that.
So thank you very much, Joe, for joining us. And
my pleasure.
We'll catch you next year. So thanks, Joe, for that interview. It was great.
That was awesome.
Super fantabulous as always, Joe.
Joe Nickell taught us all cool magic tricks and stuff. He was really fun.
The best part of interviewing Joe Nickell is you can just let him go.
Yeah, go, Joe.
Yeah, go, Joe, go. He's just a fountain of knowledge, a fire hose of stories.
He's got a great office, too. If you ever find yourself in Amherst, New York, which many people do, stop by his office at the CFI headquarters, because he's got some great, skepticism, paraphernalia. It's like a museum in there.
He has his own lab, too. He really is the...
Yeah, he's got like a CSI lab in his office.
Cool.
It's awesome.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter @TRC_podcast.